What is up, gangsters? It is a sweltering hot day out here in the middle of nowhere at Rube Goldberg Enterprises. It's like literally 95 outside, I think, and of course, the air conditioner is on the fritz, so yes, I am baking. If I pass out from heat stroke while I'm talking to you guys, you'll know why. Anyway, nonetheless, in spite of the fact that it is unpleasantly warm in here, it was time to do a video because this is one of my favorite kind of days. I just finished a project, and quite a long and adventurous one it has been. I have in front of me here on the bench the Special Hobby 132nd Tempest Mark V that I literally just glued the last bit on maybe an hour or two ago. And wow, definitely glad to be done. This one probably, I don't know, I didn't keep track of the hours, but I bet if I added them all up, it would be a couple hundred hours. I know that I've been working on it steadily without switching to anything else for the last, let's see, today's June the 13th, about the last 6 weeks, since the beginning of April pretty much. And I had probably a month's worth of days into it before that. So anyway, lots of hours in this thing, but, and hopefully you guys will agree, I think well worth the effort. This for me has been a lot of fun. I've even been kind of surprised at how much fun. And part of the reason is because I have had a lifelong love affair with the Tempest / Typhoon family. And for those of you who don't know, the Typhoon and the Tempest really are almost the same airplane. I mean, for all practical purposes, the differences are almost like the difference between a P-47 Razorback and a P-47 Bubble Top, or a P-51 Mustang D and a Mustang B. Maybe a little bit more significant. The Typhoon had lots of problems with the engines being unreliable. They mostly took care of those things with the Tempest. There were some issues with the landing gear, some different things like that. But the big difference with the Tempest is that the wing is about 5 inches thinner. And that was a huge performance increase for the Tempest. It's significantly faster than the Typhoon. I mean, like 450, easily in a dive, 400 plus in level flight, easily capable of running down a V-1 flying bomb. And that's one of the things that Tempests were most famous for. But I just love the look of the thing. For me, it combines, a sleek and sexy airframe with some muscle. I mean, for me, it's like the 1960s Chevelle SS of World War II aircraft. And god damn, what an engine. If you're not familiar, the Mark V and 6 Tempests had the Napier Sabre, which was just, I don't know of another piston engine that really rivals it in terms of complexity and just brute power. Some of the later radials maybe for sure, but the Napier Sabre is a 24-cylinder H configuration engine. Got 4 banks of 6 basically arranged in a kind of a rectangular format, 48 spark plugs. I mean, can you imagine having to do maintenance on something like that? And straight up 2,400 horsepower. I mean, what a brute. That is a man's airplane right there. And really, it was one of, if not the best, piston-powered fighter of World War II. And I know that's going to be sacrilege for some guys. I mean, I love Mustangs as much as anybody, but the Tempest really was, really did have the edge in some areas. But it came along pretty late in the war. I mean, they barely saw action in 1944, and the Mark II with the Centaurus radial, which was even better in many ways, didn't see any action at all because those all went to places like Pakistan and India for service there. And they only ended up building about 1,400 Tempests. And the really sad thing is that virtually all of them were destroyed. There are only one or two right now in the world that are even in museums. And there are a couple of projects to restore a couple of Tempests, and they're working from very limited. They're starting with really rough parts. Although Kermit Weeks, if you're not familiar with him, he's the guy that has the Fantasy of Flight Museum down in Florida, and he's a collector and has a lot of amazing airplanes. Weeks actually has two Tempi. He's got a Mark V that is being restored and could end up being airworthy. The main thing is going to be the engine on that one. And the airframe on that one is almost complete. And then he has a Mark II that also is in very good shape. So there could end up being a couple of Tempests that sort of come back to life. But it really is a sad thing that these aircraft were not kept around because they really were amazing airplanes. And the men who flew them were badass dudes because they were not necessarily easy planes to fly, particularly the Typhoon. So anyway, I love this aircraft, and when Special Hobby came out with it, I knew I was going to have to build a 132nd version of it. I built the monogram 132nd Typhoon when I was a kid, if you even knew there was one of those. And it was one of my favorite things that I did as a model maker when I was a kid. I was like 13. I didn't do a good job. I would, it's one of those things where I wish it was still around in a closet someplace, but I'd probably be horrified if I actually saw it again. So this one was a foregone conclusion that I was going to tackle this. But I wanted to do something different because all of the wartime Tempests carried the same ocean gray and RAF dark green camouflage scheme, and sometimes with invasion stripes and things like that. And it's not that they weren't cool, but everybody does those. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that after the war was over, the RAF mandated that all of its fighter aircraft be repainted in RAF high-speed silver, which was basically an aluminum lacquer, much like the DuPont lacquer that was used on the wings of Mustang D models. And a lot of people think when they see pictures of these aircraft that they were natural metal, but they were not. They were actually painted silver. And so I wanted to do one in the silver paint, but the problem is that silver, especially on something this size, is just boring. It's you don't really even get the same kind of variation that you do with bare aluminum. And so it was going to be challenging from that perspective to do something different and to make it interesting. And so what I chose to do was to try and tell the story of one of these Tempests that is, this particular one is from 3 Squadron, which was moved to Germany after the war and hopped around to a bunch of different airfields over there. And some of the 3 Squadron aircraft were repainted and some were not. And in the cases where they were, it was painted directly over the original camo. And so I felt like I could tell the story of this being aluminum paint as opposed to being natural metal. Because look, let's face it, we're all conditioned to believe that anything in the model aircraft world that's painted silver is supposed to be aluminum. Because that really is, unless you want to go with bare metal foil or do something crazy like I did on my F-86, you don't have a lot of good options for depicting an aluminum skinned aircraft. And so trying to show something that was actually painted silver as opposed to being aluminum, for me it was a bit of a puzzle. And I'm fully prepared for people to be confused by this. But the basic strategy that I chose to try and tell that story was to show that the aircraft was weathered enough on top of that the silver paint was weathered enough on top of the original camo to allow some of it to show through. In particular on the wing walks where you had a lot of foot traffic and the paint took a lot of abrasion. And I'll talk about how I did that after I show you the pictures. But there are photographs. I mean, there's not a lot of good Tempest photographs to begin with, but there definitely are not very many good photographs of them in the silver paint. I mean, thinking through the ones that I used as my references that I looked at, I mean, I could count less than a dozen good photographs, and very few that show the tops of the wings. In fact, I have one particular photograph, and I'll show it to you here, but it's of a Mark VI that was serving in Egypt, and you can see the wear and tear on the tops of the wings, and part of that obviously is because of the climate there. Now, would one that was painted in silver paint in 1945, late or 1946, serving in Germany, that was being flown for training and proficiency maintenance, have that much wear on tops of the wings? I don't know. It's certainly possible. I know that from at least one photograph that I've got. Is it probable? I don't know. This is one of those situations where I had to take some artistic license and use my imagination to extrapolate what I thought was possible while still trying to maintain a realistic and authentic appearance. So hopefully I've been able to pull that off. I guess you guys will have to decide for yourselves. So on that note, let's take a look at the pictures and you can see what you think. Okay, so there you go. That's the story. And I will talk a little bit about how I did all of this. But first, let me sort of finish talking about the kit itself, because if you tuned in to the first two episodes of this, what was going to be a two-part build/review, you know that I injected a third episode in the middle there because there was just a lot to talk about with this kit, and so I kind of want to close that out. Overall, well, let me not talk about overall first. Let me just sort of finish out from where I left off with the construction. From where I left off last time, the rest of it went together kind of the way that everything else had up to that point, with basically every single part requiring some fiddling. I mean, look, I feel like about 80% of the parts in this kit don't fit, and I talked about that in that middle episode, where I really just kind of feel like it's an issue of tolerancing. But you know, while every part requires attention, for the it's nothing major. It's shaving a little here, sanding a little off of that, using your filing skills, things like that. So overall, not too bad, more of the same. The only real major drama with the remainder of the project was really all about the landing gear, and I'm not going to flip this thing over to talk about it, but the landing gear on this is terrible. And really, to be fair, the first culprit in that is Hawker, because they made the landing gear on this thing just ridiculously complicated. I mean, look, I wasn't there. I wasn't in their head. I don't know all their reasons, but as a mechanical engineering guy, I can recognize a Rube Goldberg type device when I see one. And the fact is that, American aircraft like the P-47D, which was almost as big and gnarly as the Tempest, had a much simpler landing gear. So it was certainly possible, and I'd love to be able to talk to some of those guys to understand why they designed it the way they did, but it is super complicated. Now, to be fair, also, Special Hobby did a fantastic job of molding all of the little bits and pieces of this landing gear. Can't complain about that. It is absolutely Tamiya quality molding work, maybe even a little bit better in some cases. I mean, even the nuts and bolts are nicely molded, where you can see all six faces and very crisp. So that part is good. But as I mentioned before, the wheel wells themselves are terribly engineered, and where that really gets to a crisis point is when you go to actually install the landing gear legs themselves. Because again, going back to the way that they've got this thing in there, the wheel wells are about 6 separate pieces that don't positively locate. And the problem is that when they don't positively locate, that affects the location of the main landing gear legs and the attachment points of the support struts that go on there. I'll show you just a little bit here. You can see in the photos, but you can see underneath there is a grid work of mechanical parts there that all have to land in exactly the right spot for the thing to go together the way that it's supposed to. And the issues with the wheel wells themselves cascade all the way out to that, and it definitely created some hassles. I spent a pretty solid day or two assembling the landing gear, and so that's my one major beef with this kit in terms of engineering. And that's why overall I would give this kit, I think, about an 85, maybe an 87, I don't know. And that's my own sort of personal scorecard. And just to kind of put that into a frame of reference, with some other 132nd stuff that I've done, I give my Tamiya 132nd P51D about a 95. That's such a fantastic kit, and it literally has maybe half a dozen parts on the entire thing that don't fit perfectly. And those are a result of Tamiya's insistence on doing that silly thing where you can put the landing gear from the open to the closed position after you build it by removing some screws. It's just silly, and that's the only thing that really causes problems with the Mustang kit. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got like my Revell 132nd Piper Stupid Cub, which is like a 70. I mean, it's just full of engineering problems, molding problems, poor detail execution. It's just not good, and it's a 2014 tool. Same thing with the Revell Germany 132nd Spitfire. It's like a 75 in my book. It has a lot of the same issues, but maybe not quite as bad as that Piper Cub thing. Somewhere in between there is my Dragon 132nd BF109 E4, which I gave about an 88 in my mind because the detail was really nice, the engineering was really pretty solid throughout, but it did have some fit issues that aggravated me, some fairly major ones, worse than some of the ones that I had with this kit. So that's about where that one rests, and I have to put this kit pretty close to that, maybe just a little bit lower. But if it weren't for the engineering issues with the landing gear, I would easily have to give this kit a 90, I think. The way I look at this is it's engineering, which is the basic breakdown of the thing and the way that it goes together as a model kit. Then there's molding, which gets into things like flash, ejector pin placement, sprue gate location, things like that. Detail execution, how good is the detail, how crisp is it, how complete is it, and fit, then of course is a huge one. And so when I take all of those things and I kind of stack those up, if it wasn't for the one major issue with all of this landing gear stuff, I could give this kit a 90 in spite of all of those fit issues, because it's just so good in every other respect. And I've really tried to be objective about this thing, which has been hard at times given how much I love the Tempest. But I feel like I'm being fair. I can tell you one thing. In spite of the frustrations that I've had with this kit, I have not felt like switching gears and working on something else at all for the last 6 weeks. I have plowed through this thing steadily without hardly taking any days off even, because it is just, I've been able to maintain my enthusiasm for it. So I think that says a lot when I have definitely built kits where I couldn't say that. I had to work on other stuff to keep myself from throwing them through the window. So definitely not the case with this thing. And as I've said before, if you are a model maker of at least intermediate skills and looking to beef up your basic modeling skills, because that's where this one will challenge you with those fit issues, this is definitely a kit that is worth it. And the value that they give you with the high-tech version, where you get the beautiful resin parts, the photo etch, all the seat belts, the masks, all of it. I mean, even at $130 or whatever it is, I think it's really one of the best values in aircraft modeling, that I've seen. So definitely worth it from that perspective. Now, very quickly, let me sort of talk about how I did the weathering on this thing. So the basic thing was that I started out with a base layer of aluminum, because I knew in areas like this, right up next to the fuselage, in a couple of places on the other side as well, that I was going to want to depict the aluminum the paint having worn all the way through to the bare aluminum. And I did that using a slightly different shade. Then I did a layer of hairspray. Then I came on top with the base camo colors, the green and the gray. And I only ran the camouflage out to like the maybe 2/3 of the way out on each wing, and then a little bit on the fuselage. In particular here, where I wanted to show that this one panel had been replaced from an unrepainted bird. Then once I had that camo down, I did another layer of hairspray, did the black wing walk stripes, and then I set about doing the chipping. And a lot of people ask if Mr. Paint, MRP, can be chipped, and the answer is obviously yes. I mean, you can see it right here. And the one thing that I really like about it is that being a lacquer, MRP is a tougher shell, and it is more difficult to chip. But what ends up happening is that you get smaller chips and greater control, and that's a really big deal to me. I subscribe to the Michael Rinaldi philosophy that there is no such thing as a chip that's too small, and so I really like the way that MRP does that for you. What I end up doing a lot is I use a brush like this, where this is a junky synthetic flexifile brush that you can see I've chopped off to where it's flat on the end, and I use it basically like this, where I just tap and peck at the paint. And that starts to not only give me nice little small holes in the top coat, but they're nice and random because of the way that the brush bristles flex. So I like that effect. I will also use other tools. I have some other little tiny brushes like this other little flexifile brush that I've chopped off when I want to do kind of a, when I want to scratch at it a little bit more. But I really try and let the brush create the randomness within the pattern, and the paint definitely helps do that because it will chip out so small. So once I had the chipping done, then I laid a coat of MRP's super clear matte varnish lacquer on it to lock everything down. Then I came in and painted all of the roundels. Now, this is something where, if you're super eagle-eyed and knowledgeable about British insignia, you've already said, yeah, Pattison, you really screwed up on that. Because, yes, the roundels are probably wrong. I got these big ones off of a Mac guitar masking sheet that, as far as I knew, was correct. I should have paid a little bit more attention, though, because I didn't realize that there was an early war version of this roundel for Spitfires, and then there's the later version, which has different proportions. The colors are pretty good, but the proportions are wrong. The red dot in the middle should be larger, and the relative proportions of the blue and the white should be smaller. So, yes, they are wrong, but, what are you going to do? I didn't find out until I had already not only used these masks, but gotten my buddy Adam England to cut me some for the fuselage and for the bottom of the wing, and painted them all on here before somebody saw a picture and said, oh, those might not be right. So, yeah, at that point, I wasn't changing it. I did have the blue wrong, and thanks to Rob Knight, also from SMCG, for pointing that out to me. And I did correct the blue, but at that point I was just like, yeah, it's red, white, and blue. They're close enough. So anyway, it is what it is. But I painted all the insignia. This particular aircraft is depicted in the wonderful reference book that I have, which is the Airframe and Miniature number 4. The Hawker Tempest, and I just love it. We don't really know whose aircraft this was or what the exact history of it was, but there is one reference photo of it that I found. It only shows it from the side as it's coming in for a landing, and the color plate in the book is, of course, their interpretation of it. But I just loved it. I thought the green was really cool. And I used MRP Russian green for wheels to do that. So then once I got all that done, then it was exhaust time. And I used I believe it's CMK resin exhausts that Special Hobby makes for this kit, and they're fantastic, just beautifully molded. You can get a good look at those. And those are also painted with some my own mixture of, well, they're painted with a rust blend of Stynylrez as the base layer, and then MRP's exhaust metal for the color coat. My exhaust, that's all airbrushed on with my trusty little Sotar. But I did create a mask so that I could get the basic shape that results from that laminar airflow, because I just didn't want to screw that up. That's, at that point in the process, I don't trust my clumsy hands and my ability to get a good tight shape like that. So what I did is I scanned the instructions and scaled up the color call out to the right size, and printed it off on some fairly stiff photo paper and cut out a mask that allowed me to airbrush the basic shape. And then I took that away and then came back and fine-tuned it with by hand. But then what I felt like was the real magic move on the exhaust stains was I came back with some like 2000 grit sandpaper and just very carefully sanded those off, because that soot pattern would get rubbed and abraded by people working and bumping up against it and things of that nature. So I feel like that lends a pretty realistic appearance to the exhaust stains. Once all of that stuff was locked in with some flat coat, then I came back, and my final weathering stage was with oils, of course. My favorite thing, and you can see that I worked the Roundels to hopefully show that they get a little bit of foot traffic on the edge over here next to the gun access doors. A little bit of random dirt here and there. But mainly the oil weathering was restricted to the insignia, and a little bit of mud down here, or dirt residue down here on the wheel skirts. I just didn't feel like that I really needed to do a whole lot more in this area, because it was already getting pretty busy. And I checked it with a couple of guys like Mike Rinaldi and Carlos Mendez, and they were like, "Yeah, dude, you're in a good spot. Just stop right there before it gets too busy." So didn't really do any more with any of that part. The only decals that are on this thing are these little ones here, this cool looking insignia on the vertical stabilizer, and then a couple of the stencils that are on this panel right here. And these decals got a little bit of weathering and fading with Winsor Newton transparent white. So I think that pretty well covers it. One thing that I did do that I thought was kind of cool, and you can see that in the pattern here on top of the engine cowl, where I wanted to show that the paint was suffering from heat, and also really kind of splotchy in this area, was that I tried out a new product because I wanted to use basically a black basing technique for that. But the thing with black basing that, at least for me anyway, that I struggle with is getting a pattern that does not look airbrushed. No matter how small and tight you get it, you're always going to have some of that to a certain degree. And that's why I often will use sponges for that part. But I didn't really feel like sponges were going to work well with lacquer. So I got these really sweet little masks. And I forget what the name of them is. Somebody on SMCG recommended them, and I got them off of eBay for like $20. There's, I think, 3 sheets in the pack, and you can see that they're made for doing these textures. And it's super random and really splotchy, and a little bit more hard-edged than what you get with an airbrush. And that's why I like it, and that's why I will use a sponge sometimes, because you get a slightly different look than you do with an airbrush. And so basically then what you do is you just lay it down and you just spray through it, to create that random splotchy texture. And I think it did a really nice job of that, and I will definitely be using these things more. So anyway, I think that's about it. I think that is pretty much the entire story of the Tempest. It's been a long project, but a fun one, and hopefully you guys agree that it was worth the time and effort spent. Okay, so there you go. There is my little Tempest story. This has been a fun project, and I think it's going to end up being one of my favorite pieces of work of anything that I've done so far. Who knows, maybe ever. I don't know. I just love the Tempest so much. I lived in Europe for a while at one time in my life, and I specifically made a pilgrimage to RAF Hendon just so I could see the Typhoon there. That's how much I love this thing. And so this has been a lot of fun. I'm simultaneously super happy to be finished with it, and kind of already feeling a little bit of vertigo over, wow, what am I going to work on next, and will it be as much fun? So hopefully it won't be a letdown from here on out, but I do love this airplane, and I'm going to be happy to have this one in my collection. So anyway, enough rambling on my part. As always, I absolutely appreciate you guys tuning in if you've watched all my nonsense, and if you choose to build this kit, which I think you should. I think it's a great kit and a great value in spite of its challenges. I hope that my little video diary of building it will be useful to you. So as always, much appreciated and much love. Take care.